fear in Colombia tonight. The Colombian drug barons, thought to be fleeing their government's crackdown.
The burning, the bombing, the terror was followed today by what the drug bosses...
In the early 1990s, Colombia was known as one of the most dangerous countries in the world. Bombings, shootings, and kidnappings occurred almost daily. All of this was connected to one feared name, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. He was the leader of the Medellin cartel, the largest drug organization of its time. From Medellin, Escobar shipped cocaine worldwide, primarily to the United States. This illicit business generated billions of dollars each month and made him one of the richest men on the planet. But that power didn't come without a price. To maintain his control, Escobar used extreme violence. Thousands of people, from police officers and judges to politicians and ordinary citizens, fell victim. Pressure from the Colombian and United States governments intensified, and alliances with his enemies further limited his freedom of movement. This situation led Escobar to his final days. Before his death in December 1993, he went through a period of fear, pursued from all sides, and slowly losing everything he had ever owned. After escaping from his self-built private prison, La Catedral, in 1992, Pablo Escobar lost much of his control over his drug empire. The prison had initially been a safe haven with luxurious amenities and government protection. However, when the Colombian government tried to transfer him to a regular prison, Escobar chose to flee. From then on, he became the country's most wanted fugitive. The situation outside was vastly different from when he was in full control. Medellin, once subservient to him, had now become a hunting ground. His cartel was weakened as numerous henchmen were arrested or killed. Once loyal followers began abandoning Escobar for their own safety. The power that had once made him virtually untouchable was gradually eroded. The pressure wasn't just coming from the Colombian police. The United States government became involved, providing technology, intelligence, and funding to hunt Escobar. A special unit called the Bloque de Búsqueda was formed, comprising elite troops trained with one goal: to find and eliminate the drug lord. Furthermore, a shadowy group known as Los Pepes emerged. This group consisted of Escobar's enemies, including former allies, rival cartels, and those he had wronged. They spread terror by burning Escobar's property, hunting down his family, and killing anyone still associated with the Medellin cartel. Escobar was under pressure from all directions. Police, the military, foreign agents, and vigilante groups were all hunting him. Every day, he moved from one safe house to another, never truly safe. His network grew thinner, his communications became more risky, and his trust in those around him declined. These were the conditions that shaped Pablo Escobar's final days, alone, surrounded, and relentlessly hunted. By late November 1993, Pablo Escobar was no longer the man everyone feared. He had become a fugitive, living under pressure. Each passing day brought him closer to the end. His final 7 days chronicle a drug lord's journey from paranoia to loneliness to death. That day, Escobar moved into one of his new safe houses. No more luxurious villas or private palaces. The homes he used were simple, cramped, and often belonged to people forced to give up their homes. He lived in conditions far from the luxury he once enjoyed. Only a handful of bodyguards remained at his side, but Escobar's trust in those around him was waning. He suspected that at any moment one of them might betray him and sell his information for their own safety. This distrust further isolated him. That night, like every night before, he could barely sleep. Every strange sound outside the house made him anxious. He knew government forces and his enemies were getting closer. He no longer had a safe place to hide. The next day, Medellin became even more dangerous for Escobar. Los Pepes launched attacks on anyone connected to him. They burned property belonging to people who had worked for the cartel, shot at vehicles, and even kidnapped distant relatives. For Escobar, this meant fewer and fewer people willing to help him. Those who had once been loyal now chose to distance themselves. Some surrendered to the authorities, others fled Medellin. Escobar became increasingly trapped in a tight circle, with few options. He began to realize that Medellin, the city he once controlled completely, was no longer safe. The streets he once controlled with money and terror had become a trap that could ensnare him at any moment. That day, Escobar tried to maintain communication with his family. He knew the risks were high, as every phone call could be tracked. However, he couldn't suppress his longing for his wife and children. The phone became his only way to feel like a father and a husband. Meanwhile, Colombian security forces were increasingly focused on tracking his communication signals. Every time he pressed a call button, joint Colombian and American forces gathered data that brought them closer together. Escobar knew he was being monitored, but his emotional drive was stronger than logic. That day added to the mental stress. He realized that every time he spoke to his family, he was risking his own life. The 4th day before his death was marked by the arrest of several of his close associates. Each arrest meant Escobar lost a communication channel, protection, or funding. He found it increasingly difficult to obtain information about the movements of the forces hunting him. His once limitless cash flow was now depleted, as his logistics lines were destroyed. Those who had once risked their lives and money for him now became the Achilles heel, leading to his downfall. At this point, Escobar's paranoia intensified. He even had difficulty distinguishing between friend and foe. That day, Escobar was accompanied by only a few remaining loyalists. He could no longer trust the vast network he once held. Everything had been destroyed. Every step he took had to be calculated. He moved from one hideout to another, trying to avoid the spies and technology tracking him. His life was now a fleeting cycle, moving house, hiding, keeping communication to a minimum, then replanning his escape. But with each move, his anxiety grew. Escobar, who once defied the state, now lived day by day in fear. This day marked a crucial turning point. Escobar made a major mistake that precipitated his downfall. He called his son, and the conversation lasted too long. The authorities quickly detected the location of the phone signal. For the elite forces who had been hunting him for months,
This moment was a golden opportunity. Unbeknownst to Escobar, he had just paved the way for his final days. While it remains unknown whether he was aware of the danger, it is clear that his longing and emotional need to speak with his family caused him to lower his guard. This was the beginning of the end. That day was his 44th birthday. However, there was no party, no celebration. He was hiding in a modest house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. That morning, Bloque de Búsqueda troops, along with American intelligence, began to surround the area after tracking the signal he had used the day before. They targeted the house where Escobar was hiding. Escobar attempted to escape. He climbed onto the roof, running from house to house to avoid being ambushed. But a firefight broke out. Bullets struck him, one hitting him in the head, ending his life instantly. That day marked the end of Pablo Escobar's long escape. A man once known as virtually untouchable finally collapsed on the roof of his modest home, surrounded by enemies from all sides.
The death of Pablo Escobar on December 2nd, 1993, marked the end of an era in Colombia. The man who had controlled the world's largest drug network for years lay lifeless on the roof of his modest home. His body was riddled with gunshot wounds, his face struck by a fatal bullet. The event symbolized that the country had finally brought down a figure who had once made them seem powerless. For Colombian authorities, Escobar's death was a major victory. For years, he had defied the law, killed police officers, detonated bombs in the city, and even forced the government to negotiate. Now, that greatest threat was gone. The Bloque de Búsqueda forces involved in the operation felt they had accomplished a historic mission, even though the road to achieving it had been fraught with blood. However, for some residents of Medellin, news of his death was filled with grief. Thousands of people came to his funeral, many of them poor residents who had received assistance from him. Escobar was known for building houses, soccer fields, and giving cash to those in need. To them, he was not just a drug lord, but also a figure they considered a protector. This phenomenon is what makes his death leave a complicated legacy. On the one hand, he was a criminal responsible for thousands of deaths. On the other hand, he was viewed as a folk hero by certain groups. These differing views underscore the immense influence he once wielded. However, the reality on the ground shows that Escobar's demise did not immediately bring peace to Colombia. In fact, after his downfall, other cartels began to take over. The Cali cartel, for example, quickly expanded its influence, exploiting the vacuum left by the Medellin cartel. The violence and drug trafficking did not stop. They simply changed rulers. For Escobar's family, that day marked the beginning of new suffering. They had to flee, seek refuge, and face the stigma of being part of a criminal dynasty. For the Colombian nation, that day served as a reminder that the war on drugs does not end with the death of one man. With the death of Pablo Escobar, a new chapter began, not one of the glory of a cocaine kingpin, but of how the Colombian nation must face the reality that the battle against drugs and violence is far from over.
Pablo Escobar's life ended on the rooftop of a house in Medellin. From a poor man, he rose to become the most powerful drug lord, only to fall to his death as a fugitive, alone. His story demonstrates that power built on violence and crime never lasts. While he left a significant mark on Colombian history, his death also serves as a lesson that no ruler is truly invulnerable. To this day, Escobar's name is still remembered, both as a cold-blooded criminal and as a figure who helped the poor. But one thing is certain, his end confirmed that the path of violence only leads to destruction.